still lingered over the ruins like a forgotten prayer. The old school, once a place of learning, then a prison of pain, now stood in silence. Charred walls, empty shells, and the ashes of the ash lords. Daniel stood in the middle of the yard, barefoot, blood dried on his shirt, the machete resting against his leg. He didn't speak. His eyes were fixed on the road that led westward. Amaka stood beside him. Her arm was bandaged with torn cloth, her hair tied with a piece of red scarf. Behind her, the freed captives were gathering, children clutching one another, women with swollen feet, old men leaning on sticks and will. They had no more enemies to fight in Orokam. But they had no home either. What next? One of the boys asked. Amaka answered without looking back. We walk. Where to? Daniel lifted his hand slowly and pointed toward the hills beyond the trees. To Otobi, he said. The village where the smoke hasn't reached. And so they walked. No shoes. No food. Just hope and memory. The sun, weak behind the clouds, cast shadows that stretched long on the red earth path. They moved in silence at first, each person carrying their own ghost. But as the hours passed, they began to speak, softly, like people relearning what it meant to be human. They shared what little they had. A roasted yam hidden in a wrapper. A calabash of rainwater left in a broken shrine. A lullaby sung by an old woman whose son had died in the burning. They crossed a narrow stream by nightfall. The water was shallow and smelled like smoke, but it was clean. They drank. They washed. They breathed. Daniel sat on a stone and watched the sky. I've never been to Otobi, he said. Amaka nodded beside him. But it has to be better than what we left. A wind passed through the bush. Not strong, but different. It carried the scent of leaves, the whisper of insects, the feeling of land that had not yet been broken. Otobi was still ahead. But the fire was behind them now. And with every step, the ashes of yesterday grew smaller. The road to Otobi narrowed as the trees grew thicker. Dry branches reached out like crooked fingers. The villagers walked slower now, their feet bruised, their bodies weary. A few carried sticks for balance. One man carried his wife on his back. No one complained. When they reached the old welcome stone, half buried in red earth, Amaka stopped. The word Otobi was still carved into it. But someone had painted a line through it in black. Daniel stepped closer and placed his hand on the stone. Still warm. No one spoke. They continued down the winding path until the trees opened into the village square. And that's when they saw it. Otobi was still standing. The huts had not burned. The roofs had not fallen. The stream still flowed. But it was quiet. Too quiet. No children ran. No goats bleated. No pots clanged over fires. Just the sound of wind passing through empty compound walls. Daniel raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. He walked ahead alone, stepping over broken slippers and forgotten cooking spoons. Chickens wandered freely, untied. Mortars were left beside pounded yam that had gone cold. It looked like a village that had vanished in one breath. Amaka joined him by the old market shed. Her fingers touched the doorframe gently. There was a fight, she said. How do you know? She pointed to the corner of the shed. Blood. Old, dry, but a lot of it. Then came the sound. A soft cough from inside the granary. They rushed over and pushed open the small wooden door. Inside, curled in the corner like a mouse, was a child, no more than 7. Dust on his skin. Eyes wide, hollow. He looked at Daniel and whispered, voice cracking. They told us to hide. That the men in black were coming. Daniel knelt beside him. Where are your parents? The boy didn't answer. Just pointed toward the far end of the village. Daniel stood and followed the path behind the last row of huts. And there, behind the yam barns, near the stream, he found them. The dead. Buried in shallow graves. Some half covered. Some still holding hands. No markers. No names. And at the edge of it all, a sign made of sticks and twine. It read, "They are watching. Do not stay." Daniel stepped back slowly. His voice trembled for the first time in days. "We're not safe here." Amaka turned to the others. "We move again. Now." "But to where?" someone asked. Daniel didn't answer. He was already staring eastward, toward the hills beyond the river, where the sky was darker. And where shadows moved, even when the wind did not. They left Otobi before sunrise. The child who survived, the one hiding in the granary, walked beside Amaka, too weak to speak, but clinging to her hand like breath. The others followed in silence. They did not mourn Otobi aloud. They had seen enough death to know when to walk and when to weep. Daniel walked ahead. He didn't speak much now. Something about the sign behind the yam barn still echoed in his head. "They are watching. Do not stay." The elders had always warned of a river beyond Otobi. A sacred one. A place where the names of the dead were carried like whispers. Odo knew, the river of life, they once called it. But since the sky turned red, the villagers had begun to call it something else. Odo Encha. The river that remembers. When they reached its banks by noon, the sky had grown dark again, though there were no clouds. Just a dimness. A quiet that held its own breath. The river was wide. Still. And black like palm oil left too long in the fire. Daniel stepped to the edge. No bridge. Only a carved tree trunk lying across the water, a narrow crossing, unstable, worn by time and footsteps. He crouched and touched the water. It was cold. But not with the chill of ordinary rivers. This cold felt knowing. Behind him, the others waited and some came closer. Eyes filled with questions. But no one spoke them. Amaka joined him. She glanced at the carved trunk. Then at the sky. "Is this safe?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Safety left us a long time ago." He took the first step. The trunk creaked beneath him. With every step, he felt a weight, like the river wanted to remember him, pull his memories into its depth. He stepped again. And then he heard it. A voice. Not loud. Not angry. Just familiar. "Daniel." He stopped. The voice came from below. From inside the water. He looked down. The river showed him a face. His father's. Burned. Beaten. But somehow, peaceful. The water shifted. Another face. His mother's. Eyes full of pain. Then calm. He closed his eyes and stepped again. Behind him, Amaka stepped onto the trunk. Then another. And another. Each one saw someone different in the water. Some wept. Some turned away. Some could not continue. But Daniel walked to the other side and stepped onto dry land. The river didn't stop them. But it reminded them. And when they all reached the other side, they did not speak for a long time. The child from Otobi looked back once, eyes wide. "What was that?" he asked. Daniel answered softly. "The past." After they crossed the river, the forest thickened. The path narrowed into single lines. Branches scraped their skin. The sound of running water faded behind them, swallowed by dry leaves and silence. The sun was still high, but the trees made it feel like evening. They walked in a line. Daniel first. Then Amaka with the Otobi boy. Then the others, wrapped in cloth and determination. And then, the whisper came. At first, they thought it was the wind. Then it spoke again.
"No. Come. Too clear to be breeze. You left them behind."
Daniel stopped. He turned. No one was near. Only trees, thick and twisted like old fists. Amaka looked up. "What is it?" Daniel didn't answer. He stepped forward again. 10 steps later, it came again.
They died for you.
Daniel clenched his jaw. He kept walking. The group moved faster now, hearts pounding. The trees felt tighter. The shadows moved differently. The silence had a sound. Then someone screamed. The young man from Ogila, Ude, fell to the ground, clutching his head. "They are calling me," he cried. "My father, he's calling me." Daniel rushed to him, grabbed his shoulders. There's no one there. But Udea's eyes were wide. Unseen. He reached toward the trees. Daniel looked. And saw nothing. Just trees. But Amaka stepped forward. She placed a hand on Udea's chest and whispered, "Be still." And then, gently, like someone blowing out a candle, the boy went silent. Not dead, just sleeping. They carried him. And walked. Faster. But the voice returned. Sometimes behind them. Sometimes beside them. It never shouted. It never chased. It just spoke.
You cannot run from what you carry. The boy is not ready. There is something in the girl. Amaka's hands trembled.
Daniel drew his machete. The group said nothing now. They were too afraid to speak, lest the voice hear their names. When they finally reached the clearing, the forest fell behind them like a door closing. Silence returned. But it was a different silence, one that came with breath. They sat on stones. They drank water. No one mentioned the voice. But in their hearts, they all knew. Something had followed them through that forest. And it hadn't come for their bodies. It had come for their guilt. The land sloped upward as they approached Ogwe Hill. It was steep, lined with broken stones and tall grass that whispered against their legs. The sun had started its slow fall, painting the sky in orange and shadows. Daniel walked ahead without speaking. His shoulders still ached from the fight in Orokam. His mind was heavy. Every step away from the river, away from the voice in the forest, felt like walking with rocks tied to his chest. Amaka followed behind. The Otobi boy clung to her side, his steps lighter now. He no longer cried in his sleep, but his eyes still searched the trees. They reached the top of the hill by dusk. And there, just before the highest point, stood a man. He wore a long brown coat, dust-stained, buttoned to his neck. His feet were bare. A woven cap rested on his head, and a wooden staff stood firm in his right hand. His beard was thick and grey like ash. His skin, deep as the earth. His eyes, steady. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched them. The group stopped. Daniel stepped forward. "Who are you?" he asked. The man didn't answer. Instead, he raised one hand slowly and pointed behind them, toward the long, winding trail they had taken to reach the hill. Daniel turned to look. But the land behind them was gone. The forest. The river. The trail. All swallowed by thick white mist, rolling and moving like breath. Daniel's heart thumped. He looked back at the man. Still pointing. Amaka stepped beside him. "We don't have time for riddles," she said. Then the man finally spoke. His voice was calm. Slow. Deep. "You have come far.
But not far enough."
Daniel gripped his machete. "We're not looking for trouble." The man nodded. "Good. Because it's already looking for you." Then he turned, slowly, and walked toward the edge of the hill. Behind him, the land sloped down toward another valley, where huts dotted the horizon and smoke rose in thin trails. "There's a village down there," Daniel said. "Yes," the man replied. "And in that village, the fire has not come." But something Amaka narrowed her eyes. "Why are you helping us?" The man paused. Then he said,
"Because I remember what it was like before the sun died. And I want to see if anyone can light it again."
He tapped his staff once on the ground. Then he vanished, like dust carried by the wind. They came down from Ogwu Hill just before nightfall. The mist faded behind them like a breath released. In the valley below, the huts of the new village sat in perfect rows. Thatched roofs. Neat compounds. No ash. No ruins. No noise. No movement. Not even a single barking dog. Daniel led the way, his hand never leaving the machete strapped to his back. Amaka walked beside him, eyes scanning the doorways. The others followed, tired but alert. As they stepped into the heart of the village, they noticed something strange. The doors were open. Everyone. But no one came out. A cooking pot steamed on a firestone. A stool rocked in the breeze. A child's wrapper hung from a stick like someone had been pulled away mid-laundry. Still, no voices. No footsteps. No greetings. They walked slowly. A baby's sandal lay in the sand, its pair nowhere in sight. The Otobi boy held Amaka's hand tighter. Then, from one of the compounds, a whisper floated out. Keep walking.
Do not knock. Do not ask. They froze.
Daniel turned toward the voice, but saw no one. Another whisper came from a different hut. They are watching us. From beneath. Amaka stepped back. What kind of village is this? Daniel walked toward the central square, where an old wooden stood under a mango tree. No one touched it. It was cracked and dry. A symbol of celebration. But it hadn't been played in a long time. Then a sound, footsteps. From behind the largest hut, a figure emerged. A woman. Old. Wrapped in a grey cloth from shoulder to ankle. Her back hunched. Her hands black with charcoal dust. She stared at them, then at the people behind them. You've come from the ashes, she said. I can smell the fire on your skin. Daniel stepped forward. We're not here to take anything. Just rest. The woman nodded. You may rest. But not stay. Not here. Why? Amaka asked. What happened to this village? The woman looked to the earth. Then whispered. The men under the ground made a deal. They took our songs in exchange for silence. Now we do not sing, and they do not rise. That was the bargain. Daniel's brow furrowed. Men under the ground. The old woman raised one hand, pointing toward the base of a tree. There, barely visible in the earth, was a hole round, lined with stones, covered halfway by palm fronds. From it came a breath. Not wind. A breath. Daniel stepped back. Amaka pulled the boy behind her. The villagers began to emerge slowly, watching from their doors, their eyes blank and hollow. And in the center of it all, the drum cracked again. By itself. Boom. 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 The cracked drum boomed again. Boom. 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 No one touched it. No wind moved it. Still, it spoke. The old woman stepped back into the shadows. The villagers, silent, watching, began to close their doors one by one. One man covered his child's ears. A young girl knelt beside a cooking pot and began to hum without sound. Only Daniel stood in the center of the square now. He stared at the drum. And at the hole beneath it. Amaka moved beside him, eyes fixed on the palm fronds. We can't stay here, she whispered. I know, he said. But we can't leave it behind either. Daniel stepped forward and pulled the fronds away. Beneath was a narrow, stone-lined hole, and carved into the earth around its rim were marks. Not writing. Scratches. Nail scratches. Deep. Desperate. And from inside the hole, the breathing continued. Low. Wet. Almost human. Amaka stepped back. But Daniel crouched. He picked up a rock and dropped it in. No splash. No thud. Nothing. The silence that followed was heavier than fire. Suddenly, the old woman's voice rang out. You must not call them. We gave them our joy so they would stay buried. If you break the silence, they will return. Daniel stood. What are they? The woman's eyes were filled with smoke. They were men, once. Then they became something else. Amaka's voice was tight. What kind of deal did this village make? The woman closed her eyes. We gave them our songs, our laughter, our babies. One every moon. In return, they gave us peace. No warlords. No raiders. No fire. Daniel looked around. At the still huts. The lifeless faces. The abandoned joy. This isn't peace, he said. And then. The breathing stopped. The drum shattered. Not cracked. Shattered. A piece of it flew across the yard and struck the mango tree. The wind turned cold. Beneath their feet, the earth gave a soft groan. From the hole, a hand emerged. Gray. Twisted. Fingers long, knuckles swollen, nails like black glass. Then another. The villagers fell to their knees. They covered their mouths. Some began to weep silently. Amaka whispered, "We need to run." Daniel didn't move. He reached for his machete and said one word. No. The hands rose from the earth like cursed roots, pulling themselves up, inch by inch, bone by bone. First came the arms. Then the heads. Then the silence broke. Not with a scream, but a hum. A deep, hollow vibration that made the villagers' teeth ache. The air shimmered. The mango tree dropped every leaf at once. Daniel stepped forward. Amaka grabbed his arm. "We're not ready for this." "We don't need to be," Daniel said. "We just need to finish it." From the hole, 3 figures stood. Their skin was like charcoal, stretched too tightly over twisted frames. Their eyes were dark but burning. Their mouths didn't move, but the humming came from inside their chests. They went fast. They didn't need to be. One step forward, and the ground cracked. One turned toward a villager who didn't bow fast enough. With a wave of its long arm, the man collapsed, silent, limp, forgotten. Amaka's breath caught. "What are they?" Daniel answered, voice low. "Ash laws that were never buried." The villagers had traded joy for silence, but not guilt. What slept beneath the drum was not cursed by gods. It was cursed by memory. Daniel walked slowly toward the creatures. The machete gleamed. His arms shook. But he did not stop. He raised the blade. The creatures turned. Their hum grew louder. Daniel shouted. Not in fear. In defiance. And from every hut, every doorway, the people began to step out. 1. Then another. Then 10. Then all. No more kneeling. No more silence. One woman picked up a broom. Another grabbed a pestle. A boy lifted a sharpened stick. The villagers did not fight like warriors. They fought like people who had had enough. They surrounded the creatures. Cut them. Crushed them. Burned them. The last one looked at Daniel, and for a moment, it smiled. Then it fell. And the ground closed. No one clapped. No one cheered. But the sky changed. Just a little. The clouds broke. And a thin, pale light fell across the village square. Not sun. Not yet. But a beginning. By dawn, the village of the voiceless had become the village of survivors. The drum was gone. The hole was sealed. The silence was over. Amaka sat on a stool beneath the mango tree, braiding the hair of the Otobi boy. He laughed softly. It was the first time Daniel had heard that sound since the fires of Orokam. Daniel walked to the edge of the village, looking out over the hills. His machete was sheathed now. He no longer needed it to feel strong. Beside him, the old woman stood once more. "You broke the deal," she said. Daniel nodded. She smiled faintly. "Good. It was never our deal to keep." He turned to her. "What happens now?" The old woman looked up at the sky. If the sun remembers us, maybe it will return. And with that, she walked back into the village. Daniel stood alone for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the red scarf, the one he had worn since the day his father was taken. He tied it to the mango tree. A sign. Not of war, but of survival. Behind him, someone began to hum. Not the hum of the dead, but a melody. A song. The first since the sky turned red. And in that song lived everything they had lost, and everything they would become. The ash had settled. All across the valley, the earth was still scarred, burnt trees, broken huts, footprints of people who came with fire and left with nothing. The world was quiet now, but not empty. The people of Otutu stood together in the center of the square, facing the east. Children with bandaged feet. Women with soot on their wrappers. Men holding tools instead of weapons. Faces still marked with smoke, but upright. Daniel stood in front of them. He looked older now. Not in years, but in memory. He carried no machete. No rifle. Just a wooden staff, carved with the names of the villages they passed, Oju, Orokam, Otobi, Otutu. A symbol. Not of war, not of leadership, but of survival. Amaka stood on a flat stone, voice steady, eyes bright. The warlords are gone, she said. The people were silent. But the war is not over. They listened. This land still remembers fire. Still remembers blood. But we are the ones left behind. And that means it's our job to begin again. Some nodded. Some cried. Some looked to the hills, waiting for something more. Then, from the top of Ogwu Hill, a sound. A low, distant rumble. The people turned. And saw it. Not fire. Not smoke. A helicopter. Old. Rusted. Wobbling like a wounded bird. It passed overhead slowly, wind shaking the tops of the trees. No flag. No warning. On its side, a faded marking. United Relief Corps, West Africa. Daniel shielded his eyes. They are still out there, he said. Amaka looked up. Watching. Daniel shook his head. Waiting. To see if we're worth saving. The helicopter vanished behind the hills. Silence returned. But it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence before a harvest. Daniel turned to the crowd. No more deals. No more running. We plant again. We build again. If the rest of the world forgot us, we will remind them with life. He walked into the earth, knelt, and pushed a yam seed into the ground with both hands. One seed. That was how the fire started. That was how the fire ended. And that was how the world began again.